Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere foggy, fancy, and deeply confused. A place where men wore cravats tighter than their emotional repression, women fainted for sport, and everyone was just a little bit addicted to something. That's right, tonight we're talking about what laudanum did to Victorian high society. It was the miracle cure for everything from a stubbed toe to spiritual despair. A bottle of comfort, a splash of opium, and a hint of brandy. Think of it as the 19th century version of wine o'clock, except it came with hallucinations and a high risk of writing poetry. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy these sleep stories about how awful history really was. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights. Turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Wrap yourself up in a blanket that feels slightly less tragic than a Victorian marriage. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever been so tired you'd drink anything labeled soothing elixir? Would you trust your doctor if he looked like a wax candle melting under stress? Could you survive in a world where every ache, sorrow, or stubbed emotion was solved with a teaspoon of opium? Would your friends still call you cultured if you hallucinated through tea time? Would you write the next great novel, or just forget what year it was halfway through? Congratulations! You've just woken up in 1856 London. The fog is thick, the morals are thin, and someone's aunt is quietly tripping in the corner. Good luck. Laudanum was the original multitasker, part tonic, part sedative, part oops. Now I see God. It was made by mixing opium with wine, which means it was essentially Victorian NyQuil, if NyQuil could cause an existential crisis. Let's set the scene. It's 1805, and you're shuffling down a cobbled London street, dodging horse droppings, passing a fog thicker than your social anxiety, and your head is pounding with a headache caused by either the gaslights, the weather, or just being alive in the 19th century. You could visit a doctor, but that's expensive and slightly dangerous. Instead, you duck into the local apothecary, a place that smells of lavender, mildew, and unresolved trauma. Inside, the shelves are packed with little glass bottles of every shape and color. There's something comforting about the labels. Most are handwritten, many are spelled creatively, and a surprising number feature the word miracle. Somewhere between the bottles of arsenic toothpaste and the jar of preserved leeches sits the Victorian wonder elixir itself. Laudanum. You approach the counter, and the apothecary, a man who looks like he could either heal you or curse your family, greets you with a knowing nod. He offers you laudanum for headaches, melancholia, insomnia, coughs, general nervousness, or simply to make the world seem a little less Victorian. It's sold by the ounce, and nobody is measuring carefully. You're assured it's perfectly safe, at least compared to everything else in your life, like typhoid or the average meat pie. The recipe itself is simple and terrifying. Tincture of opium, dissolved in alcohol, sometimes sweetened, occasionally colored with something that would now require a hazmat suit. There's no FDA, no warning label, and no sense of moderation. Just a handwritten note. Dose as needed. The bottle is stoppered with cork and hope. Sometimes you buy it in a fancy vial. Other times it comes in a reused gin bottle with the faintest scent of previous regrets. It's time for your first taste. The flavor? Imagine cough syrup, but with the bitterness of 100 sleepless nights and a burn that reminds you alcohol is technically a solvent. Still, you keep going, because in about 10 minutes you won't care what anything tastes like at all. As the laudanum works its magic, your body relaxes, your mind drifts, the headache is gone, or maybe you just can't feel your face. The city's harsh edges blur. Suddenly, the existential dread that usually parks itself on your chest like a cat with boundary issues has dissolved into a gentle indifference. Is this relief, or is it mild brain damage? In Victorian England, it doesn't really matter. You step back onto the street, a new person, or at least a heavily sedated one. If you're lucky, you'll make it home before your legs give up and you start reciting poetry to a lamppost. You might find yourself pondering the meaning of life, or just wondering why everything smells like boiled cabbage. Laudanum quickly becomes a staple of your medicine cabinet, your pocket, your purse, and probably your children's lunchbox. It's prescribed by every self-respecting doctor, recommended by friends, and advertised in newspapers with promises of instant tranquility. Mothers keep bottles handy for colic and coughs. Gentlemen dose themselves before meetings. Poets treat it like creative rocket fuel. And the rest of society pretends not to notice that half their neighbors are quietly on another planet. And so it spreads, drop by drop, bottle by bottle, turning an entire society into something softer, blurrier, and significantly less productive. The beauty of laudanum is that it solves all your problems until it becomes the biggest problem you have. But that's a story for another segment. For now, you've got your Victorian multitasker in hand, a new sense of possibility, and just the faintest suspicion that nothing in this century is actually real. Welcome to the age of laudanum. Enjoy the haze. You step into a London pharmacy where the shelves glisten with glass bottles of amber liquid. Every label promises relief, vitality, and an occasional out-of-body experience. It smells faintly of licorice and moral ambiguity. Behind the counter stands the apothecary, a man in a waistcoat dusted with mysterious powders and the faint look of someone who's seen things he'll never discuss at dinner. His spectacles are perched halfway down his nose, giving him the air of either a genius or someone who's about to dose you with something experimental just to see what happens. In his world, there's a cure for everything, whether you need it or not. You scan the crowded shelves. Bottles labeled cordial of calm, nerve elixir, and essence of serene. There's Mrs. Whipple's night tonic, for dreamless sleep and occasional trances, and Mr. Godfrey's infant quieting syrup, ideal for teething, tantrums, and general existential despair. For the discerning lady, there's always Dr. Featherstone's female elixir, balances humours and husbands, while the gentlemen have the choice of Brewham's invigorating drops, now with extra opium. There are no ingredients lists, just poetic promises and a long line of testimonials from people who are probably now deceased. The real star of the show is laudanum, which sits in pride of place in a glass cabinet. It's advertised as a soothing solution for all life's troubles. Coughs, colic, heartbreak, headaches, regret, one bottle fits all. The label might as well read, whatever your problem, just stop feeling it. Sensory overload is everywhere. The light streaming in through the dusty windows glimmers off rows of coloured glass, making the place look more like a confectioner's shop than a dispensary of questionable chemicals. The sharp, sweet aroma of licorice masks the underlying hints of alcohol and something a little darker, like a cake baked by someone with a grudge. Sometimes there's a whiff of mint, but that's only because the apothecary keeps his breath fresh between questionable sales pitches. The counter itself is a marvel. There are scales for weighing powders, mortar and pestle for grinding roots, and drawers filled with dried herbs and secret blends. There are tins of lozenges for the throat, jars of camphor for the nerves, and somewhere in the back, a locked box containing the truly dangerous stuff, the things that make even the apothecary's hands tremble just a little. As you wait your turn, you listen to the customers ahead of you. There's a gentleman buying a restorative for his nerves, which he's managed to fray with an aggressive dedication to both work and worry. A pale woman, veiled in black, is quietly requesting a sleeping draught. The mother beside her clutches her infant and asks for something to keep the little one calm. The apothecary smiles, never judging, always ready with a solution that comes in liquid form. It's a place of hope and hazard. A Victorian wellness centre, where the line between medicine and wishful thinking is as thin as the apothecary's patience on a busy Monday. Modern pharmacies offer 2 aisles of cold remedies and a vague sense of disappointment. Victorian apothecaries offer absolution in a bottle and the possibility that you might just float out of your troubles for a while. or at least until the next dose. The soundscape is part of the experience. The clink of bottles, the crinkle of waxed paper, the low hum of gossip as Mrs. Peabody leans in for her weekly restorative. The apothecary is part chemist, part confessor, and part neighborhood oracle. You'd trust him with your darkest secrets and, apparently, with your major organs. Of course, not everything is as rosy as the labels suggest. People come here for cures, but just as many return with new symptoms. If you're lucky, you'll sleep soundly. If you're less lucky, you'll dream vividly of flying over London in your nightgown, pursued by an enormous talking carrot. But as far as Victorian medicine goes, that's still a better outcome than most. When your turn finally arrives, you step forward, describe your complaint, and watch as the apothecary measures out a solution with a flourish. The bottle is cool in your palm, the liquid golden, and the promise is simple: relief for as long as it lasts. You step back into the city, feeling a little lighter. Whether from the medicine or the placebo, you'll never know. But for a few shining moments, as the bottle clinks in your pocket, you believe that anything can be fixed, and that's worth almost as much as the cure itself. It's early morning in Mayfair. You're sitting at a breakfast table surrounded by lace, porcelain, and hangovers. Your tea is weak, but your laudanum is strong. It's going to be a productive day of doing absolutely nothing. The sunlight filtering in is barely brighter than the candle stubs left over from last night's tragic poetry readings and quietly competitive games of whist. Someone's butler is moving in slow motion, setting out toast with the gravitas of a man preparing for surgery. You hear the faint clink of silverware, the creak of starched linen, and the sigh of a relative who's already contemplating their next nap. Welcome to the Victorian breakfast ritual, where the only thing stiffer than your collar is the conversation. On your plate, a modest selection of limp kippers, 3 kinds of jam, and a slice of bread so pale it could be cast in a ghost story. There's also something that was once an egg. No one's quite sure when. The coffee is more of a suggestion, brewed to the strength of rainwater and tasting faintly of hope and despair. Fortunately, you have your secret weapon, a neat glass vial, heavy with the golden brown promise of laudanum, tucked next to the salt cellar. A gentle tap, just a few drops in your tea. You stir slowly, watching the opium swirl into the cup like Victorian cream. At this point, laudanum is less of a remedy and more of a breakfast condiment. No one blinks. In fact, the only person not dosing is the family dog. And even he's eyeing the decanter with suspicion. The conversation floats through the air, full of elegant self-pity and low-key dread. Cousin Eleanor is describing her nerves. Aunt Beatrice is consulting the obituaries, her favorite section. Your brother is nursing a headache and a deep existential malaise that predates his birth. The talk drifts from politics to poetry to the weather, which is, surprise, gloomy, and not just metaphorically. Outside, the fog sits so thick on the street, it's practically a family member. Suddenly, the butler arrives with a decanter of brandy. Because, as everyone knows, nothing helps wash down the taste of opium and disappointment like a shot of spirits. It's not even 9 a.m., but who's counting? You accept a splash, feeling the gentle warmth chase the laudanum through your veins, while your mood lifts and your sense of time becomes negotiable. There's a soft etiquette to it all, the passing of cups, the precise arrangement of cutlery, the whispered requests for just a touch more. The Victorians may have invented the idea of polite society, but they also perfected the art of starting the day with a full-body chemical reboot. Productivity, in this context, means making it from breakfast to lunch without either fainting or insulting a guest. Every so often, a letter arrives, delivered by hand, sealed with wax. Bad news travels by envelope, good news is an urban legend. The maid lays it beside your plate with a trembling hand, then retreats to the kitchen, presumably for her own restorative. Housemaids were not immune to the lure of the apothecary's wares. You break the seal, skim the contents, and depending on the gravity, add another few drops to your cup. It's hard to say whether anyone actually tastes their food, or if the real meal is just the gradual numbing of reality. The clatter of porcelain is comforting, the lace tablecloth is starched into submission, and everyone's opinions are gently sedated by tradition, duty, and the ever-present whisper of laudanum. If you look closely, you'll see little bottles tucked behind sugar bowls, under napkins, and, occasionally, mistaken for marmalade. Every member of the household has a slightly different method. Some drop it in tea, some in coffee, some just take it neat. The effects are similar. By the end of breakfast, everyone's mood is mellow, conversation is foggier, and the looming threat of daily life has receded, if only for an hour. And so, with the dishes cleared and the dog sent out to bark at ghosts in the fog, you rise from the table, ready for a day full of gentle sighs, unread books, and minor Victorian crises. Secure in the knowledge that whatever comes, you're only ever one spoonful away from blissful detachment. Productivity, Victorian style. You can't make this up. Your doctor prescribes laudanum for headaches, hysteria, grief, and, occasionally, boredom. He calls it medicine. You call it Tuesday. He doesn't wash his hands, but you don't notice. You're too busy floating through a velvet haze. Let's be honest, you don't come to the Victorian doctor expecting a cure. You come for an experience. His office is a riot of walnut cabinets, cracked leather chairs, and the faint aroma of stale cologne, mildew, and last week's bloodletting. On the walls are anatomical diagrams of mysterious origin, several of which appear to be upside down. You're not sure if it's a medical reference or just avant-garde interior design. The doctor himself is a man with sideburns that could frighten a raccoon and a coat that may or may not have doubled as a picnic blanket. His desk overflows with bottles, powders, mysterious implements, and the kind of paperwork that's mostly receipts for leeches. His eyes are sharp, but his handshake is clammy. A Victorian tradition. You list your symptoms: headaches, fatigue, existential terror, the creeping sense that your wallpaper is judging you. The doctor nods sagely. He writes these down with a flourish. No symptom is too trivial. Toothache? Laudanum. Lost a pet goldfish? Laudanum. Saw a cloud shaped like a skull and can't shake the feeling of doom? You guessed it. Laudanum. His prescription pad is legendary. He flips through it like a magician preparing for his big finale. The advice is simple and always sounds profound. A teaspoon in the morning for clarity, another at midday for nerves, and a third before bed, just in case you start thinking about the void. You wonder if the same bottle is also meant for polishing silverware and sedating the parlor cat. The answer is probably yes. Physical exams are brief and mostly theatrical. He presses your wrist, gazes into your eyes, and listens to your chest while humming a tune that may be the overture to your own funeral. Stethoscopes are an option, but mostly he relies on intuition and the mystical power of a reassuring frown. Sometimes he consults his medical tomes, which date from the last century and include helpful chapters like How to Balance Your Humors Without Bleeding to Death and The Benefits of Leeches, a cautionary tale. When the diagnosis is done, he presents your prescription with a flourish. There's no real warning about side effects, unless you count the passing comment that prolonged use may result in mild forgetfulness, insatiable poetry, or sudden existential apathy. You nod and pocket the bottle, already half believing in its magic. It is, after all, endorsed by science, or at least by a man who owns several books and a hat with feathers. If you're a woman, the diagnosis is even more delightful. Anything from feeling faint to expressing an opinion is written down as hysteria, a catch-all term for being alive while female. The solution? More laudanum, sometimes paired with a course of rest in a room filled with floral wallpaper and nothing sharp. The doctor assures you it's for your own good. He also prescribes walking, air, and occasionally marrying a distant cousin. If you're a child, the doctor has something for you too. Children are small adults, he explains, pouring laudanum into a tiny cup. Just give them less. The result is a new generation of Victorians who grow up thinking reality is supposed to be soft around the edges. Outside, you clutch your little brown bottle and step into the ever-present London fog, wondering how many people on the street are riding the same invisible cloud as you. The answer is most of them. Even the doctor, if his bloodshot eyes are any clue, has been dipping into his own supply. But you can't argue with results. Your headache is gone, your anxieties are dissolving, and the world feels just the tiniest bit more manageable, like a novel with most of the difficult chapters skipped. The only real risk? One day, you might have a symptom for which laudanum isn't prescribed. But that's a problem for another Tuesday. And with that, you float back home, ready to tackle whatever Victorian life throws at you next, armed with a bottle and the unwavering support of your neighborhood medical professional. As for hand washing, that's just another modern fad you'll be grateful for in 100 years. For now, you're sedated, soothed, and ready for anything. Except, maybe sobriety. Every respectable Victorian woman has a delicate constitution and an even more delicate relationship with reality. Inside her purse, a bottle of laudanum labeled for the nerves. She calls it a remedy. You call it denial in liquid form. Let's talk about the Victorian female condition. From novels to etiquette manuals, society is obsessed with the idea that a well-bred lady must never raise her voice, break a sweat, or openly acknowledge the fact that life is, at times, a rolling disaster. Her world is one of fainting couches, discreet sniffles behind lace handkerchiefs, and the perpetual threat of the vapors. A polite term for being overwhelmed by a life where even walking briskly is considered a scandal. You wake up in a canopied bed, already exhausted. Maybe it's the corset slowly compressing your lungs, or perhaps the endless obligation to never appear too happy, too sad, or too awake. Breakfast is a tepid affair, weak tea, a dry biscuit, and the soft encouragement of your mother to avoid undue excitement. Luckily, tucked inside your embroidered purse, next to a sachet of lavender and a hand mirror, is your little glass bottle. The label is fading, but you could pick it out of a lineup in your sleep. A few drops in your morning tea, and suddenly the world feels less jagged. The parlor is brighter, the conversation softer. Even the neighbor's off-key piano practice sounds almost tolerable. Your husband drones on about parliamentary news. Your children bicker, and the maid is one dropped plate away from open rebellion. But none of this matters, not really. Not when you can gently blur the edges of reality with a little help from your pocket pharmacist. It's a public secret. At Bridge Club, every handbag on the table holds the same telltale bottle, usually labeled with a false name or a mysterious set of initials. For nerves, for sleep, for ladies of distinction. The marketing is subtle, the need universal. Sometimes, a friend will sigh over a headache or a restless night. The polite response is, "Never. Are you okay? But would you care for a little something?" This something is always laudanum, discreetly decanted, sometimes right into a cup of tea, sometimes straight onto the tongue if it's been a particularly taxing morning. As the day unfolds, society women drift from one low-stakes crisis to another. Which gloves to wear? Who's been snubbed at the assembly rooms? Whether the vicar's sermon was slightly too enthusiastic? The world is a minefield of small embarrassments and unspoken rules. Laudanum doesn't solve any of it, but it does make enduring it much easier. Suddenly, your neighbor's passive-aggressive comment about your azaleas barely registers. The anxiety that sits in your stomach like an undercooked potato melts away for a blissful hour or two. Doctors call it a medical marvel. The magazines call it the perfect solution for the female disposition. Husbands are mostly grateful, since it keeps complaints at a pleasantly muffled volume. The only real concern is whether the pharmacy will restock before the next garden party, where competitive pettiness can be a real cardiovascular event. Of course, there are risks. The world starts to get a little fuzzy around the edges. Your diary entries become more poetic, less factual. Sometimes you forget whether you attended last Thursday's luncheon or just dreamed about it. And occasionally, you wake up from a nap, convinced it's Tuesday when it's actually Friday. But who's counting? Your responsibilities are endless. But thanks to your little secret, your patience is bottomless. Or at least, bottomless until the bottle runs dry. By evening, as you retreat to your room for a rest, code for "please let me be unconscious for 10 minutes, you slip the bottle back into your purse. There's a gentle comfort in knowing you're not alone. Every lady on your street, from the grandest manor to the humblest cottage, is coping with her own swirl of worry, boredom, and stifled dreams. And all of you, together and alone, are getting by with a little liquid courage, Victorian style. It's not quite freedom, but it's close enough for now. Children cry, mothers dose, and silence descends. The same drug that soothes your teething baby also keeps your nerves in check. The entire family sleeps like angels, if angels were slightly intoxicated. In the Victorian home, bedtime isn't just a routine, it's an orchestrated event. The nursery is filled with soft candlelight, threadbare toys, and the muted wails of children who, just moments ago, were locked in a death match over a wooden block. No one reaches for a lullaby or a favorite storybook first. Instead, there's the familiar clink of a tiny glass bottle, the gentle pop of a cork, and the careful counting of drops into a spoon. It's Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup or Godfrey's cordial or, for the discerning parent, plain old laudanum doled out with the precision of a chemist and the enthusiasm of someone who really needs to get some sleep. The children taste it without protest. They've learned that whatever is in that bottle will turn their world pleasantly fuzzy. In minutes, the crying stops. Small bodies relax, eyelids droop, and a profound, peaceful silence blankets the house. The effect is so immediate and reliable that you wonder if you could get it in a larger size. Maybe a barrel. Of course, it's not just for children. Mother, running on 2 hours of sleep and a relentless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and maintaining social respectability, takes her own dose. Just a teaspoon for the nerves. It turns dinner preparation from a battle against chaos into a pleasant floating sensation, where even the burned pudding and the dog's daily disaster barely register as nuisances. Father, coming home from a day of important business, which mostly means reading newspapers and avoiding emotional vulnerability, pours himself a generous helping, supposedly for his digestive complaints. Before long, even grandfather's gout seems less offensive when viewed through the gentle haze of pharmaceutical hospitality. The family cat, mercifully, is spared. But everyone else gets a taste. Baby is teething and screams at the injustice of new molars. Laudanum, toddlers bouncing off the walls. Laudanum, teenager in a mood? You guessed it. The apothecary assures you that it's perfectly safe when used as directed. And as directed mostly means until the house is quiet. This culture of medicinal dosing is woven into the fabric of daily life. Children's medicines are sold in bright bottles, marketed as pleasant tasting and perfectly safe. The advertisements boast testimonials. "My baby now sleeps 12 hours a night," says one mother. She does not mention that her child is now slightly nocturnal and dreams only in shades of sepia. Nobody really questions the wisdom of opium for infants. It's endorsed by doctors, mothers, and your slightly odd aunt, who always travels with her own supply. Sometimes you hear of a child who slept a little too soundly, or a neighbor who can't quite remember if her son's first words were actually spoken or imagined in a laudanum-induced daydream. There's a dark undercurrent to this era's trust in bottled calm, but it's swept under the rug along with most Victorian problems. After all, isn't a quiet home the greatest measure of good parenting? At least, that's what the magazines say. If anyone in the house is sick, fever, cough, the mysterious summer complaint, out comes the laudanum again. It's the universal solution, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Babies take it. Adults rely on it. The elderly demand it, sometimes more out of habit than need. The phrase from cradle to grave is literal here, and nobody seems to see the irony. Outside, the world is loud, uncertain, and cold. Inside, there's a gentle glow, a hush, and the shared secret of a family kept together, and occasionally sedated by the miracle of modern medicine. If angels are watching over you tonight, they probably envy how well you sleep. Just don't ask too many questions about the long-term side effects. That's a worry for another century. For now, you'll settle for peace, quiet, and a very mellow chorus of tiny snores. You're a writer, a dreamer, a poet with a candle guttering beside you. Your ink runs thick, your mind runs wild, and your muse is liquid. By the time you finish your masterpiece, you can't remember what language it's in. This is the golden age of the suffering artist, and you, unfortunately, have been cursed with inspiration. And a bottle of laudanum that sits uncorked at your elbow, glinting in the flicker of candlelight. The line between genius and gibberish is measured in teaspoons, and you're never entirely sure which side you're on. Your desk is piled with unfinished sonnets, letters you don't remember writing, and the occasional dead moth that may or may not be a metaphor for hope. Outside, the city is smothered in fog. Inside, you chase after visions. Sometimes they're glorious, epic novels, romantic ballads, dark paintings that stare back at you with hollow eyes. Sometimes they're just strange. You find a poem scrawled on your sleeve and realize you've rhymed spleen with tangerine. Is it art? Is it nonsense? In the Victorian world, that's a distinction for future generations. You take another sip of laudanum, feeling your nerves unwind, the pressure of reality slipping away. Suddenly, every feeling is enormous, every sorrow bottomless, every fleeting joy worthy of its own 3-volume novel. The great literary minds of the day, Coleridge, De Quincey, the Brontes, at least on weekends, are all rumoured to partake. Opium is as common as heartbreak and just as addictive. The world seems softer, but also sharper, all at once. A melody from next door floats through the thin walls, and, in your haze, you write it down as a love letter to the moon. Your candle hisses and pops, shadows wobble on the wallpaper, and your imagination is off to the races. Inspiration visits in bursts, sometimes an avalanche, sometimes just a trickle, but laudanum is always there, smoothing the rough patches, dulling the edges, convincing you that even the most overwrought metaphor is an act of divine genius. But then, inevitably, comes the cost. You reread your work in the harsh, grey light of morning. Some lines sparkle with brilliance, others are barely coherent. You wonder if the characters in your novel were meant to be symbolic, or if you simply lost track of their names halfway through. Your handwriting slopes drunkenly across the page, letters sprawling like exhausted actors after the curtain call. There are moments when the muse turns on you. Inspiration dries up, replaced by a heaviness, a languor that seeps into your bones. The bottle that was once your closest companion now glares accusingly from the corner of your desk. You find yourself searching for words, searching for meaning, searching for the next dose that will make the blank page less terrifying. Your artist friends don't help. Everyone's chasing transcendence, each in their own peculiar way. The painter down the hall spends hours staring at a half-finished portrait of a cat, convinced it's a commentary on the futility of ambition. The composer next door claims he can hear colours. Lavender is a waltz, ochre is a dirge, but can't remember how to play the piano. You meet at cafes and salons, trading verses and complaints, arguing over whether suffering is a requirement for greatness or just a side effect of poor self-care and even poorer judgment. Outside, critics and admirers alike speculate about the connection between genius and addiction. Are you a visionary? Or just very, very high? Does it matter? As long as the work endures. The city's publishers have developed a taste for eccentricity, and your most feverish, delirious writing often draws the most praise. The pain, the beauty, the blurred reality, it all becomes material. Still, you keep chasing the muse, bottle in hand, mind somewhere between brilliance and oblivion. The masterpiece might elude you, but the creative chaos is comfort enough. And if your best work makes sense only at 2 a.m., under the influence of both opium and insomnia, well, that's just the Victorian way. After all, what's art without a little madness, and what's madness without a little laudanum? You cap your pen, blow out the candle, and drift off, dreaming in iambic pentameter. Afternoon tea is a graceful affair. China clinks, gossip drips, and everyone's pupils are the size of saucers. Nobody remembers what they were arguing about, which is just as well. You sit at a lace-draped table in a drawing room, filled with the sweet, confusing scent of roses and old furniture polish. Outside, the London rain is falling with its usual enthusiasm, but inside, the only thing dampened is everyone's short-term memory. You're wearing your second-best gloves. Everyone is. No one trusts their hands before noon. The windows are fogged up, the fire is crackling, and the mood is as light as the cucumber sandwiches are thin. A maid glides around with a silver tray, offering cups of tea poured so delicately you'd think the leaves had been massaged into submission by angels. There's a tower of scones, tiny pastries, and finger sandwiches, each a testament to the Victorian belief that calories don't count if the food is small enough to eat in one bite. Next to the sugar bowl is a cluster of delicate glass bottles, laudanum, disguised as digestive drops, nerve tonic, or soothing cordial. No one says anything about it, but everyone knows. The only thing more common than jam at this table is a discreet dash of liquid calm. Conversation flows, or rather meanders, like a sleepy river. Lady Portia is detailing her plans for the upcoming charity fete, which may or may not have happened already. Mrs. Bagley's latest scandal is discussed in hushed, delighted tones, though nobody can quite recall what she did, only that it was improper and required an extra drop in the teacup. Sometimes the talk turns philosophical. Are orchids too decadent? Is the vicar's beard a symbol of secret radicalism? Are these actual questions, or is everyone just mildly hallucinating? You watch as a guest stirs her tea in endless circles, staring into the cup like she's expecting a prophecy to materialize. Next to her, a gentleman forgets his own punchline halfway through a story about fox hunting, but is too serene to mind. The hostess's cat is curled on the window seat, more awake than anyone in the room. The effect is communal, a room full of people floating together, tethered only by tradition and the faint sound of distant church bells. Tea isn't just tea, it's theatre. The ritual of pouring, passing, and sipping is a performance designed to keep everyone's hands busy and their minds pleasantly fogged. At the edge of the gathering, a nervous young lady, new to society, glances anxiously at her aunt, who tips a tiny bottle into her teacup with the practiced nonchalance of someone seasoning soup. "For the nerves, dear," she whispers. "It's always for the nerves." The tableware is beautiful but oddly treacherous. If you're not careful, you'll dip your scone in laudanum instead of lemon curd. More than one guest has been known to eat a sandwich and then drift into a poetic trance about the meaning of watercress. The true danger isn't the sharp tongue of Lady Mortimer, but the possibility that you'll say something embarrassing and instantly forget it, only to repeat it next week. Occasionally, the conversation dips into politics or art, but never for long. Someone giggles about the French, a heated debate over wallpaper patterns simmers and fades, and in the far corner, Lord Ashby is peacefully asleep, propped upright by years of habit and 2 cups of restorative tonic. Time stretches and wobbles. Was tea always this long? Has anyone seen the clock? Outside, the world rushes on. Carriages rattle past, shopkeepers shout, dogs bark at chimney sweeps. Inside, the high society set floats serenely above it all, adrift in a sea of floral wallpaper, sweet pastries, and just enough laudanum to keep reality at bay. As the sun sinks, the party breaks up. No one's entirely sure who started the applause, but everyone joins in. You leave the drawing room lighter, both in spirit and memory, soothed by tradition, company, and the tiniest, sweetest taste of Victorian escapism. It's the highest tea in town, and nobody minds if you can't remember what happened. That's what tomorrow's tea is for. Death is never far in Victorian London. When mourning becomes unbearable, the solution isn't therapy, it's tincture. You don't process your emotions, you dissolve them. The house is draped in black, mirrors turned to the wall. Every clock stopped at the exact minute of passing. The air is heavy with the scent of lilies and loss, mixed with the subtle, medicinal tang of laudanum. You sit in a drawing room stuffed with solemn relatives and professional mourners. Women hired for their ability to weep on command and consume sandwiches without blinking. The only thing stiffer than your upper lip is the starched crepe at your wrist. Outside, the city shuffles on, cabs clattering, vendors shouting, the Thames rolling past in shades of grey. Inside, time itself seems to pause, held in suspension by 1,000 unspoken words. The etiquette of grief is an endurance sport. There are strict rules for how to sit, how to sigh, how to mention the deceased without collapsing into either sobs or accidental laughter. But thankfully, there's a shortcut through this labyrinth of social expectation, the discreet clink of a laudanum bottle passed from hand to trembling hand. You take a measured dose, not too much, just enough to soften the ache. In moments, the pain blurs at the edges. Your sorrow, previously sharp as broken glass, recedes to a dull, manageable ache. Instead of waves, grief now comes in ripples, smoothed over by the quiet numbness of chemical compassion. Aunt Edith, who lost her 3rd husband last winter, offers a knowing nod and a second bottle. She's practically a connoisseur. Her black veils seem to multiply with every tragedy, but her nerves remain impressively steady. Letters of condolence pile up on the side table, each one stamped with black wax and written in the looping script of distant cousins you barely remember. You skim the words, "Thoughts and prayers. He is in a better place. May you find comfort in this difficult time." You reply with the same phrases, a careful mix of gratitude and practiced detachment, your pen steady in a hand numbed by opium and repetition. Mourning is an occupation in itself. For widows, especially, it's a full-time job, one measured in veils, prescribed walks, and carefully rationed tears. Doctors advise laudanum not just for sleep, but for female distress, grieving nerves, or melancholy of the heart. It is, by all accounts, more effective than talking. After all, why relive the pain when you can simply dilute it? Instead of pouring out your soul, you pour a teaspoon. Even children aren't immune. The little ones are confused by the black clothes and the sudden hush in the house, but a few drops of laudanum at bedtime ensure dreamless, peaceful sleep. The Victorians are sentimental about children, but not sentimental enough to put up with midnight tears. Soothing syrup is the standard response. Later, when you're older, you'll wonder if that's why your memories of loss are so quiet, almost faded, as if someone set your childhood to music and then turned down the volume. There are downsides, of course. The edges of memory blur, the days stretch together. You wake unsure if it's Wednesday or Saturday. The the face of your departed loved one grows softer in your mind, and sometimes you wonder if the comfort is worth the cost. But the alternative, a raw, unfiltered sadness, seems impossible in a world that prizes composure above all else. The weeks pass, and the household gradually returns to normal. The black crepe is folded and packed away, the mirrors turned face out, the clocks wound once more. Only the bottle remains, a half-empty reminder that, for a while, you didn't have to feel everything all at once. You survived, not by healing, but by quietly pressing pause on your emotions. In the end, grief in Victorian London is a private, muffled affair. There's a tincture for everything, for tears, for sleepless nights, for the ache of missing someone who won't return. You move on, lighter but slightly hollow, grateful for the numbness, and ready for the next social catastrophe. If you've learned anything, it's that in a world obsessed with keeping up appearances, sometimes the only thing more essential than mourning itself is forgetting, at least until tomorrow's sorrow arrives. Behind closed doors, the men of influence sip brandy and discuss politics with glazed eyes. Every great empire needs a little chemical assistance. Just don't ask them to stand up too quickly. You find yourself in a leather-upholstered armchair that has seen more whispered secrets than a confessional booth. The room is thick with the scent of tobacco, old cologne, and that mysterious undertone found only in buildings where nobody's opened a window since the reign of George III. Gas lamps glow along the walls, casting everyone in a flattering golden haze, a sort of permanent Instagram filter for men with sideburns. The club is a sacred institution, part office, part sanctuary, part opium den with better upholstery. Gentlemen of a certain status gather here nightly to unwind, debate, and, more often than not, forget what they were debating in the first place. There are endless shelves of books, a billiard table that has been in play for 12 years, and portraits of previous members staring down in mute judgment. The staff moves silently, appearing just in time with another decanter or a tray of little brown bottles. You never see where these bottles come from. They simply manifest, like guilt or inherited debt. The conversation, such as it is, floats somewhere between lively and completely incomprehensible. Lord Devonshire is holding forth on the subject of trade with India. At least, you think it's India. It could be Ireland. It might actually be the bakery down the street. His argument meanders, punctuated by long pauses while he contemplates his cufflinks, or quietly wonders whether he's still speaking out loud. Across the table, Sir Geoffrey offers a counterpoint but gets sidetracked describing the patterns in the carpet. A young member of Parliament, eager to impress, takes copious notes on a napkin, only to realize halfway through that he's been doodling elephants. Brandy flows. Laudanum flows faster. It's always poured discreetly, under the pretense of medicinal use, though everyone knows the real medicine is not having to feel anything too keenly. The club has a code. What's said here stays here, unless it's too funny to keep secret. Even then, you'll have forgotten the details by morning. This is networking, Victorian style. Half-hearted chess matches, vague promises to support someone's bill, and stories about fox hunting that grow more improbable with every round of drinks. The mood is friendly, competitive, and mildly conspiratorial. Occasionally, an argument breaks out, but it's quickly sedated, sometimes by another toast, sometimes by a quiet word, sometimes by a friendly opium-tinged daze. The great issues of the day, reform, taxes, the scandal with Lady Windermere's cat, all seem less urgent after a few drops of the good stuff. Outside, the world is cold, wet, and noisy. Inside, there is peace, or at least a kind of shared inertia. Members recline, sigh, and let their worries dissolve. Their eyelids droop. Occasionally, someone nods off mid-conversation. This is accepted, even respected. It's not a true gentleman's club until at least one person is snoring quietly in a high-backed chair, drooling into his cravat. There's an art to managing one's dosage. Too little, and you might actually remember your responsibilities. Too much, and you'll wake up to find someone's drawn a monocle on your face with ink. Most members find a happy medium, existing in a perpetual twilight of pleasant numbness and vague ambition. But as midnight approaches, even the most resolute begin to fade. Gentlemen gather their hats, find their canes, and attempt to stand. This is the most dangerous moment of the evening. Knees wobble. Someone mistakes the umbrella stand for a coat rack. There is a lot of dignified swaying, a touch of collective giggling, and a profound sense that the empire is best run from a seated position. You step out into the night, the sharp air stinging your cheeks, reality returning with every step. But for a few precious hours, you have been part of something grand, if only in your own laudanum blurred memory. A brotherhood held together by tradition, brandy, and the warm, fuzzy denial that everything will sort itself out in the morning. And that's the way it's always been. Empire, after all, is hard work. Best not to do it entirely sober. It's 1860, and the top-selling product is Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. It contains morphine. Mothers swear by it. Infants sleep soundly. Doctors shrug. You try not to think about it. The world of Victorian childcare is a fascinating exercise in hope, desperation, and very questionable science. You're a new parent in a world without pacifiers, sleep training, or baby monitors. Your only tool for surviving the endless onslaught of wailing is a medicine cabinet filled with concoctions that could stun a horse. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup is the star of the show. Its cheery label features wholesome script and promises gentle relief from teething, colic, and the general indignities of being alive under 3 feet tall. You prepare for bedtime with the precision of a pharmacist and the nerves of a bomb disposal expert. The ritual is familiar. Swaddle the baby, light the candle, then reach for the syrup. You pour a careful spoonful, holding your breath, as if expecting it to combust. The baby's face contorts, first suspicion, then confusion, then a kind of blissful resignation. Moments later, the house is silent. A miracle, or is it? Outside, your neighbors are doing the same. In every row house, in every grand townhouse, babies are drifting off to a morphine-laced dreamland. Victorian streets are quiet after dark. Not because children are naturally angelic, but because they are sleeping off a chemical nap. The local pharmacy stocks children's cordials right next to the licorice sticks and penny sweets. And nobody seems to notice the difference. It's not just Mrs. Winslow's either. There's Godfrey's cordial, Dolby's carminative, Atkinson, and Barker's infant preservative. The list is endless, the effects similar. You begin to wonder if the real Victorian family crest should be a spoon, a bottle, and a very relieved mother asleep at the kitchen table. Motherhood, after all, is an Olympic sport in this era. The days are long and filled with peril, boiling laundry, feeding finicky children, avoiding the judgment of neighbors whose own children are suspiciously quiet. You're expected to keep a spotless house, produce healthy heirs, and never complain about the fact that your toddler has been screaming for 7 hours straight. The solution? Something that calms the nerves, soothes the baby, and, if we're being honest, conveniently sedates everyone long enough to get a little peace and quiet. Doctors offer few alternatives. A visit to the local physician will result in sage advice to keep the child warm, avoid drafts, and, when in doubt, administer a soothing draught. If you're lucky, he'll toss in a pamphlet about fresh air and moral hygiene. But you know what actually works. A teaspoon of syrup, a quick prayer, and the silent agreement never to ask what's really inside the bottle. There's a dark comedy to the whole enterprise. Modern parents fret over screen time and gluten. You're just trying to make it through dinner without anyone having a Victorian meltdown. At least when the baby cries, you have a solution. The only side effect, so far, is an entire generation with a slightly distant look in their eyes and a collective memory that skips the toddler years altogether. Sometimes you catch yourself worrying. Is this safe? Should you trust a syrup with no ingredients listed, apart from the cheerful assurance that it's recommended by mothers for over a generation? You bring it up at the next mothers' gathering, but you're met with tired smiles and knowing nods. "We all use it, dear," says Mrs. Fletcher, pouring herself a discreet dram. "Besides, have you tried surviving teething without it? The bottle's empty, the babies sleep, and the city dreams." Nobody questions the wisdom of the system, at least, not out loud. The real secret of Victorian parenting isn't patience or discipline or a special rocking technique. It's a bottle in the cupboard and the hope that someday someone will invent a safer way to get a child to sleep. For now, you tuck your baby in, tidy away the empty spoon, and savor a few blessed moments of quiet. You know deep down that this is the very definition of a bad decision. But in a world where options are limited, sometimes a little chemical help is all that stands between you and total collapse. The artistic elite have one thing in common. They all believe suffering makes you profound. Laudanum provides plenty of suffering. It's the muse, the misery, and the marketing strategy. You're at a salon on a Thursday night, which means the room is thick with pipe smoke, the soft sound of a distant piano, and at least 3 tortured souls arguing over the nature of art. The poets recline on threadbare settees, draping themselves in attitudes of ennui. The painters cluster by the window, sketchbooks open, eyes red-rimmed from either inspiration or insomnia. No one is sure. In the corner, the latest novelist chews on her pen, already halfway through a bottle of creative elixir. You can practically taste the collective yearning in the air. Everyone here is convinced that genius must be earned the hard way. A broken heart, an existential crisis, a haunting sense that life is just a long corridor lined with unpaid bills. All fodder for the creative mind. And if you're running short on misfortune, that's what laudanum is for. A few drops, and suddenly every lampshade is a metaphor. Every shadow on the wall, an allegory. Even the cheese plate is loaded with hidden meaning. You take a sip of your own medicine, literal or otherwise, and join the debate. Should art reflect reality or transcend it? Is beauty a thing to be captured or destroyed? Are you out of wine, or did you just hallucinate your glass being full? The discussion is circular, impassioned, and increasingly incoherent. Someone reads aloud from their latest poem, voice trembling with emotion and questionable rhyme schemes. Nobody's brave enough to criticize, after all. You never argue with someone who's 3 sonnets deep and slightly sedated. The most celebrated artists aren't just talented, they're tragic. Their biographies are a patchwork of illness, unrequited love, and mysterious ailments, best treated with a doctor's note and a generous dose of tincture. Society adores them, but only if they're miserable enough. The newspapers describe their fragile nerves, their unquenchable melancholy, and of course, their devotion to the bottle. Suffering sells. Even if you're not feeling particularly down, you're expected to perform a certain amount of visible despair, ideally with ink-stained fingers and a haunted look. Late in the evening, you drift over to the painter's corner. He's describing his latest work, an abstract piece inspired by a week spent exploring the boundaries of consciousness, translation, sleeping off a hangover, and eating suspicious mushrooms. The colors, he explains, came to him during a laudanum dream. He gestures at the air, as if the muse herself is perched on the mantle, occasionally wagging a finger in warning. You realize that everyone here is chasing the same fleeting feeling, the rush of inspiration, that rare moment when the world seems to make sense, even if only for a page or a brushstroke. Laudanum, for all its faults, flattens the peaks of anxiety and raises the valleys of despair just enough to let creativity slip through. Your ideas come faster, your hand moves freer, your doubts are muffled to a distant hum. Of course, It's not all candlelit brilliance. Mornings arrive with headaches, manuscripts riddled with nonsense, and the persistent suspicion that you've just written a 3-act play about cheese. You compare notes with your friends and realize you've all lost track of whether you're inspired or just inventing new ways to avoid facing reality. But at least you're in it together, a brotherhood and sisterhood of noble suffering, fueled by mutual encouragement, caffeine, and controlled substances. Victorian art will be remembered for its intensity, its raw emotion, and, let's be honest, its occasional incoherence. The real masterpiece isn't the painting or the poem, but the myth of the suffering artist, bravely composing while the world crumbles, or just slightly wobbles, around them. You close your notebook, cork the bottle, and stare into the fire, feeling both tragic and slightly accomplished. Tomorrow, the cycle begins again. Anguish, inspiration, and the hope that, someday, suffering will finally go out of fashion. You're at a lavish banquet. The roast is cold, the conversation colder, and the hostess has mistaken the laudanum bottle for dessert wine. Nobody's correcting her. The chandelier glimmers over a table set with enough silverware to perform minor surgery. You're squeezed between Sir Eustace, who smells faintly of mothballs and failed business ventures, and Lady Clarissa, who has not smiled since the Crimean War. The footmen parade in with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for royal births, balancing dishes of limp asparagus, aspic wobbling with existential dread, and a roast so well dressed it's clearly overcompensating for its lack of heat. Somewhere near the end of the table, the hostess raises a crystal decanter. A little something for the nerves, she chirps, refilling glasses with what she believes is a rare sherry. The room toasts. Glasses clink. The first round is met with polite confusion, notes of anise, a faint bitterness, and that unmistakable warmth that means someone is about to start reciting Keats. The conversation wanders from the weather, always miserable, to the latest scandal, never your own, and circles back to the hostess's favorite topic, how very trying it is to find decent help these days. A few guests giggle at nothing in particular. Sir Eustace shares a joke he's clearly forgotten halfway through. Lady Clarissa stares into her plate with the intensity of someone hoping to fall in. Across the table, a minor poet is waxing lyrical about fog. The roast arrives, overcooked and resigned to its fate. Vegetables are passed with the speed of a slow-motion carriage accident. You reach for your glass and realize you can't remember whether you're on your second or fifth digestive. The room begins to soften at the edges. Conversation blurs. Someone tries to stand for a toast, forgets why, and sits down again with a gracious nod to the bread basket. By dessert, things have grown gently chaotic. The trifle is swimming in a mysterious liquid, possibly meant to be brandy, possibly the same laudanum making its rounds. Someone's aunt is quietly weeping with happiness over the custard. The footman brings coffee, but it arrives lukewarm and heavily scented with medicinal cordial. The guests are mostly unconcerned. You're all well acquainted with the evening's unspoken rule. As long as nobody's on fire, the party is going splendidly. You notice the small oddities that mark a Victorian gathering at its peak. The host's cousin has started humming softly, eyes closed in transcendental bliss. The vicar has launched into a story about the bishop's garden gnomes, and nobody's stopping him. Even the family dog, lurking under the table, looks slightly euphoric. There is a general consensus that the evening is a triumph, though no one can recall exactly why. Through it all, the laudanum bottle sits at the center of the table, unchallenged, gleaming under the candlelight. The more reserved guests take their portions discreetly, swirling a drop or two into their wine, while the bold experimenters pour generous splashes into anything that doesn't run away. The air is thick with laughter, secrets, and just a touch of delirium. As the party winds down, the room feels floaty and forgiving. Coats are fetched, hats donned, and goodbyes said with grand, muddled affection. The guests tumble into carriages, promising to write, to visit, to never speak of the hostess's trifle again. Back home, you realize you can barely recall who was sitting to your left, or what was served, or why the evening felt so pleasant despite the culinary crimes committed. But you do remember the easy warmth, the sense of camaraderie, and the way the laudanum made everything, food, conversation, even awkward silences, just a little easier to swallow. Dinner parties, Victorian style. Come for the roast, stay for the side effects. You can't make this up. Headaches are fashionable. Everyone has them, everyone complains, and everyone drinks to cure them. Society runs on caffeine, corsets, and quiet addiction. You wake up with the distinct feeling that someone has spent the night gently hammering on your skull with a tiny ornamental mallet. The culprit could be the wine, the laudanum, the stuffy parlour air, or just the existential dread that comes from reading the Times at breakfast. In Victorian England, a headache isn't just a medical complaint, it's practically a social obligation. This is the era of tight corsets and tighter schedules. Fashion dictates that your ribs should be rearranged into a pleasing hourglass, your posture as rigid as the family's sense of propriety, and your ability to breathe just barely optional. It's no wonder your head aches. Your entire body is being gently strangled by whalebone and societal expectation. The phrase, suffering for beauty, has never been more literal. Caffeine is both a cure and a cause. The day begins with tea, progresses to coffee, and often ends with yet another cup of something hot and dark to ward off the chill and the shadows. A proper Victorian household consumes enough tea to keep the East India Company afloat. The result: a population that is slightly more alert, but vibrating with low-level anxiety and the unmistakable throb of caffeine-induced headaches. But let's not forget the environmental factors. London's air is a heady mix of coal smoke, damp fog, and the faint hint of something decomposing in the next alley. By mid-morning, the city's famed pea soup mists roll in, bringing with them a selection of headaches in every style. Throbbing, pounding, stabbing, and the ever-popular "my skull is full of cotton." The doctors write entire treatises on the subject, using words like neuralgia and vapors. You use words like, "Why is the wallpaper moving?" Laudanum, naturally, is the household answer to all forms of cranial distress. A teaspoon in the morning, a drop before dinner, a discreet sip at the opera. The medicine cabinet becomes a shrine to pain relief, lined with little brown bottles promising respite. There's also the ever-popular restorative cordial, a mixture of alcohol, opium, and the faint hope that this time, maybe, you'll just sleep through it. But headaches aren't just physical, they're a convenient social get-out-of-jail-free card. Dinner party too dull? Headache. Required at an excruciatingly long sermon? Headache. Husband suggesting a third child? Headache of biblical proportions. The phrase "not tonight, dear" is practically a catchphrase. Doctors are eager to help, and their solutions are as varied as they are questionable. There are mustard plasters, cold compresses, and leeches for the ambitious. Some recommend fresh air, though in London that's a calculated risk. Others suggest gentle exercise, but only if you're male, wealthy, and immune to ridicule. For women, the best advice is usually bed rest and silence, which conveniently is also the cure for being overly opinionated. Headaches have become an essential part of the social fabric, an accessory worn with as much pride as a cameo brooch. You meet your friends for tea, compare symptoms, and debate whose pain is most poetic. Mine started after the garden party, you sigh, clutching your temples dramatically. Mine's been building for weeks, replies your rival, ever since the wallpaper arrived from Paris. The day passes in a haze of aches, remedies, and resigned sighs. By evening, you're not sure if the pain is real, imagined, or simply a side effect of modern life. One more drop of laudanum, one more weak smile for the household, and you make your way to bed. The faint hope of a clear head lingering in the darkness. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and do it all again. Because in Victorian society, If you're not complaining about a headache, are you really participating at all? Laudanum becomes an accessory of grief. Black veils, pale faces, trembling hands, every widow's eyes shimmer with more than just tears. It is the season of mourning. In Victorian England, grief isn't simply an emotion, it's a public performance and, sometimes, a competitive sport. The whole house falls into shadow, thick curtains are drawn, the clocks are stopped, and portraits are swathed in black crepe. Even the houseplants seem to wilt in sympathy. The air grows heavy with the scent of lilies, beeswax, and the faint medicinal tang of laudanum, always just out of sight, always close at hand. For widows, mourning is an elaborate ritual prescribed by etiquette manuals and reinforced by the collective gaze of neighbours. There are entire books devoted to what to wear, how long to weep, and exactly how many years a respectable woman should shun parties before returning, with modesty, to polite society. Step 1. Wear black and lots of it. Your dress is layered and sombre, heavy with both fabric and expectation. Step 2. Show no joy. Laughter is forbidden, unless you can convincingly pass it off as a sob. And, of course, step 3. Don't fall apart, at least not in public. This is where laudanum glides elegantly into the ritual, poured discreetly into a crystal glass or taken in small drops throughout the day. It keeps your hands from shaking, your voice from cracking, your composure intact. You're allowed to look fragile, but never uncontrolled. The line between dignified sorrow and social catastrophe is thinner than a Victorian teacup. Visitors pay their respects, speaking in hushed tones, delivering platitudes as brittle as the biscuits. He is in a better place. You are so brave. Time heals. You nod. Your face carefully arranged. Your mind floating behind a gentle opiate haze. The laudanum blurs the sharp edges of loss, smoothing every emotion into something manageable, presentable, appropriately tragic. Mourning attire extends far beyond a simple black dress. There are veils to cover your face, gloves for trembling fingers, jet beads for sorrow, and handkerchiefs perpetually dampened with just enough tears. At every turn, society provides you with props for your role, but behind the scenes, behind the lace and the layers, laudanum is the true stage manager, ensuring that each cue is hit, each line delivered with just the right degree of devastation. Evenings are the hardest. After the guests have left, the house feels impossibly quiet. The empty chair by the fire, an accusation. In these silent hours, grief presses close, as heavy as the drapery. You pour a measured dose, grateful for the small mercy of numbness. The ache becomes distant, less immediate. Sleep comes, if not easily, then at least reliably, an accomplishment in itself. The rituals don't end with the widow. The entire household participates in mourning, each person performing their own muted choreography of loss. The children wear black sashes. Servants speak in whispers. Even the family dog senses the change, lying quietly by the door, as if expecting its master to return. Laudanum bottles appear in bedside tables, kitchen cupboards, coat pockets, each one a silent accomplice in the ongoing pageant of sorrow. Months stretch on. There are rules for how long you must mourn: deep mourning, half mourning, the gradual easing back into colour. At every stage, laudanum waits, smoothing the transition. Society approves. No one asks too many questions, as long as you keep showing up in the right attire, with the right look in your eyes, haunted, dignified, and always just a little bit distant. Eventually the mourning ends. The veils come off. The laughter returns, quiet at first, then stronger. You look in the mirror and almost recognize yourself again. The bottle is tucked away, a relic of a season survived. In Victorian England, you have honoured the dead, satisfied society, and, thanks to laudanum, managed to grieve without coming undone. You are, in short, the very picture of Victorian resilience, or at least the closest thing to it that medicine and manners can provide. You pen a letter to your beloved. It begins romantic and ends somewhere between incoherence and revelation. Your handwriting slants like your morals. This is the golden age of correspondence, after all. Everyone of breeding keeps a writing desk, a little shrine of quills, ink pots, and paper embossed with the family crest. The room is quiet but for the ticking of the clock and the distant chime of a carriage bell. You take a deep breath, dip your pen, and begin, my dearest. But already your mind is fluttering, a mix of butterflies and the gentle haze of laudanum swirling in your veins. At first, you're focused and poetic, the sort of lover who belongs in a Tennyson verse. You write of moonlight and longing, of the curve of a cheek and the torment of distance. You promise eternal devotion, or at least an enthusiastic attempt. The ink flows, the lines loop elegantly then, somewhere after the third paragraph, things begin to unravel. You're not quite sure if you're describing your beloved's eyes or the way the wallpaper is breathing. Your metaphors get tangled. The candle sputters, and you can't decide if it's romantic or simply running out of wax. I would cross oceans for you, you declare, or perhaps a rather damp garden. You're seized by a sudden need to confess all your deepest feelings and also, possibly, your recipe for lemon biscuits. The page blooms with outpourings of love, philosophical questions, and a surprising amount of commentary on the neighbour's cat. It's not entirely your fault. The Victorians are nothing if not emotional. This is an age obsessed with feeling, suffering, and the written word. You are expected to pour out your soul in ink, and if your soul happens to be slightly medicated, well, so much the better. Laudanum doesn't just soften the aches of the body. It loosens the locks on your heart. Suddenly, everything feels urgent, enormous, worthy of 3 exclamation points and a line of poetry in the margin. By the time you reach the end, your handwriting is more suggestion than script. Words wander off the lines. You start signing your name, then forget if you're writing to your beloved or to the wallpaper. Somewhere in the middle, you wax rhapsodic about the moon, declare your undying loyalty to someone's aunt, and compose a haiku about the noise the postman makes. Yours eternally, occasionally, and with moderate enthusiasm, you sign off with a flourish, dotting your I's with more hope than accuracy. Sealing the envelope is its own small adventure. You melt the wax, miss the paper, and nearly set fire to your cuff. Eventually, the letter is dispatched, entrusted to the post, a miracle of modernity and chance. You sit back, exhausted and elated, half wondering if you should have edited, and half hoping your beloved finds your ramblings as charming as you do, or at least, as charming as you do right now, in your current state. Days later, you receive a reply. It's equally rambling, filled with declarations, questions about the nature of the universe, and a sketch of a spoon for reasons nobody will ever fully understand. You realize, with a sleepy kind of delight, that your beloved is just as besotted, confused, and creatively unhinged as you are. This is Victorian romance, after all. Sincere, sentimental, occasionally incoherent, and always delivered with the flourish of someone who's just a little out of touch with reality. The postman is a silent accomplice, carrying passionate declarations across muddy lanes and misty city streets, never judging the sprawl of the handwriting or the wobbly heart sealed inside. Tomorrow, you'll write again. Maybe it will make sense. Maybe it won't. But in a world where feelings are bottled, passions are whispered. And the only thing more intoxicating than laudanum is love itself. A good letter is sometimes the only thing holding your heart and your sense of self together. Besides, nobody ever fell in love over perfect penmanship. Incoherence is just another word for sincerity, at least in this century. They pour the tea, mix the tonics, and whisper to each other as their masters drift away mid-sentence. Upstairs is decadent, downstairs is judgmental, and everyone's mildly high. In the grand houses of Victorian England, the great unspoken truth is that the servants are the glue holding reality together. While the lords and ladies above practice the art of dramatic fainting, half-hearted poetry, and frequent chemical escapism, it's the staff below stairs who keep the machine running, usually on time, occasionally on purpose, and always with a running commentary. The butler is a master of discretion. He's polished the family silver, poured out more brandy than the average distillery, and can refill a laudanum bottle with such elegance that you'd swear it was alchemy. His face never changes, even as Lady Georgina requests her nerve tonic for the third time before noon, or Lord Peveril asks for something to quiet his gout, which is code for "I need to forget that Parliament exists." The butler knows everyone's vices and secrets, but his only confession is a sigh, released, quietly, behind the kitchen door. Meanwhile, the housemaids are an intelligence network unto themselves. They collect gossip like other people collect dust. If you want to know who's courting whom, who's overdue on the chemist's bill, or which guest has been scribbling secret letters by candlelight, just listen to the rhythm of broom bristles and whispered conspiracies over laundry. Nothing escapes them, not even the footsteps of the youngest son sneaking back at dawn, or the fact that someone has been helping themselves to the laudanum decanter in the library. In the scullery, the cook is the undisputed queen. She controls the kitchen, the menus, and, if we're being honest, the entire emotional atmosphere of the house. If the cook is in a mood, so is dinner, and, by extension, the whole family. She's seen what happens when Lady Clarissa doesn't get her restorative drops before supper. Cold soup, cold stares, and the kind of silence that echoes through stone walls. The cook's solution is simple: dose the gravy. Who's to know? Everyone eats, everyone calms down, and peace returns, one spoonful at a time. Below stairs, there's a strict social order, but also a certain gleeful camaraderie. At the servants' table, tea is poured strong, the conversation stronger. Mrs. Blake, the housekeeper, dispenses judgment with the flick of a duster. The mistress is in one of her moods again, she says, and everyone nods, because everyone knows. And everyone knows not to say it out loud. Laudanum is discussed with both skepticism and envy. I wouldn't touch the stuff myself, but if it keeps the upstairs lot from screaming about the wallpaper, then pass the bottle. The children's nurse, that unsung hero of household survival, has her own methods: a little syrup for teething, a dab for nightmares, and just enough medicine to ensure that nap time is honored as a sacred right. The nurse is both healer and negotiator, wielding lullabies and tinctures with equal skill. As for the footmen, they're the eyes and ears of the household, silently judging the foibles of their superiors while perfecting the art of standing still and looking unruffled. They've seen everything: the secret arguments, the tipsy embraces, the time Uncle Bernard mistook the conservatory for a water closet, and through it all, they remain unfailingly polite, at least to the family's faces. By late evening, as the upstairs crowd sinks into their cushions and their opium dreams, the servants gather in the warmth of the kitchen, sharing stories, rolling their eyes, and counting the bottles in the larder. They may not have inherited estates, but they've inherited the world's best collection of stories. After all, if anyone truly knows how the household runs, it's the people who are paid to keep it from falling apart, one mildly sedated aristocrat at a time. Downstairs, the laughter is real, the secrets are safe, and the tea is strong enough to keep everyone awake until the morning bell. Upstairs may be adrift in a velvet haze, but downstairs, the servants see everything and remember every word. Some doctors begin to notice that their patients aren't exactly recovering, but they're also their best customers. Ethics and income wrestle, and ethics loses in the first round. In the shadowy comfort of his consulting room, Your Victorian doctor surveys his ledger with a look of professional concern. The fire crackles, the windows rattle with another London drizzle, and the air is thick with the scent of tinctures, old books, and anxious money. He strokes his mutton chops and ponders a troubling truth. Business is booming, but nobody seems to be getting any better. In fact, half his patients seem to be stuck in a gentle loop of headaches, melancholy, and mysterious stomach complaints that always require a refill. The doctor's practice is, to put it delicately, built on recurring revenue. Laudanum, that liquid Swiss Army knife, flies off the shelves faster than the latest medical pamphlet on the dangers of improper hat sizing. The very people who should be cured, society ladies, anxious merchants, men of letters, and at least one bishop, keep returning, each with new symptoms and the same haunted look in their eyes. Sometimes, the doctor wonders, should he say something? Caution a patient about the wisdom of drinking opium with every meal. But then Mrs. Weatherby arrives, clutching her handkerchief and requesting a little more for her nerves. He hesitates briefly, then remembers the leaky roof at home and the price of coal. Out comes the prescription pad. Ethics is a wonderful concept, but not one that puts food on the table or keeps the apothecary on speaking terms. The medical journals are beginning to whisper. In the pages of The Lancet, a nervous columnist wonders if perhaps so much laudanum isn't entirely wholesome. A few bolder souls publish statistics, pointing out the alarming rise in accidental overdoses and a new medical phenomenon known as persistent daydreaming. But most doctors dismiss these warnings as alarmist. After all, how could anything so effective possibly be bad for you? Consultations are brisk, if not entirely clinical. You arrive with a list of vague complaints, headaches, sleeplessness, a tendency to see your neighbor's cat as an omen of doom. The doctor listens, nods, and scribbles instructions. Take as needed, he says, which really means take whenever life feels even slightly disappointing. He tucks the fee into his drawer and tries not to think about the long-term consequences. Sometimes he attempts a bit of medical innovation. Have you tried fresh air? He might suggest. But you both know that London's version of fresh air is less invigorating breeze and more particulate soup. Exercise is fashionable, in theory, but only for gentlemen who own horses or ladies who don't mind being stared at for walking unescorted. As for conversation therapy, well, that's why the laudanum exists in the first place. The apothecary, meanwhile, is doing a roaring trade. The doctor and the pharmacist exchange knowing glances, each profiting from the other's steady hand. Another bottle for Mrs. Fairfax? Asks the apothecary, already reaching for the cork. Double her last dose, says the doctor, who has noticed a slight uptick in Mrs. Fairfax's letters to the Times, but not in her general well-being. On rare occasions, a patient actually improves. The doctor is pleased but secretly nervous. A cured patient is a lost customer. More often, patients simply plateau, existing in a world pleasantly dulled at the edges, too content to complain but never quite healthy enough to stop coming back. As the doctor locks his ledger at night, he tells himself he's doing good work. After all, everyone is calm, no one is rioting, and the vicar has stopped writing poetry about his bunions. But in the quiet moments, as the laudanum bottles dwindle and the waiting room fills once again, he can't help but wonder, is this medicine or just maintenance? Still, when faced with the choice between a steady income and an ethical crisis, most Victorian doctors make the only logical decision: prescribe, reassure, and let the next century sort it out. Every household has one, a cousin, a brother, a wife, lost to the haze. Families whisper, "She's delicate," while quietly refilling her bottle. It's an open secret, tucked behind the lace curtains and polite conversation. The person in question is rarely mentioned directly, but their absence hangs in the air, a ghostly presence at every family gathering. Maybe it's your aunt, who once played piano for the vicar's supper but now prefers the quiet solitude of her boudoir, emerging only for meals and, occasionally, to weep at the window. Or perhaps it's your older brother, the one who had such promise, a sharp mind, a university education, and now a fondness for staring into space for hours on end. In Victorian England, addiction doesn't look the way it does in the penny dreadfuls. There are no alleyways, no shadowy deals in the night, unless you count the apothecary's after-hours service. Instead, it happens in drawing rooms, behind bedroom doors, and, most heartbreakingly, at the family table. You notice the little signs, the bottle always a little emptier, the words just a little more slurred, the laughter that fades too quickly into silence. She has a sensitive nature, says your mother, as she dabs another drop of laudanum into her sister's evening tea. He's simply prone to melancholy, says your father, shaking his head at his son's wandering gaze. The language is careful, the diagnoses gentle. Nobody wants to use the word addict. It's too harsh, too final, and far too modern. Better to wrap the problem in layers of sympathy and secrecy. Guests learn to accept the peculiarities. The cousin who must excuse herself for frequent rests. The uncle who nods off in the middle of his own anecdotes. The wife whose nerves require a steady supply of medicine and whose presence is felt most keenly in her absence. There are whispered stories, shared over cooling cups of tea. Remember when she used to sing, "He hasn't ridden his horse in months"? The stories are always wistful, never accusatory. Doctors oblige, of course. Prescriptions are written with a sympathetic nod and a discreet handshake. The apothecary's delivery boy becomes a familiar face, slipping in and out with parcels tied up in brown paper. Even the servants, who know everything, maintain a careful silence after all. Their own jobs may depend on the family's ability to keep up appearances. You try to remember when it started. Maybe it was after the loss of a child, the collapse of a business, or just the slow, grinding boredom of a life measured in small disappointments and too much idle time. Laudanum was supposed to help, to take the edge off, to make it all a little more bearable. At first it did. Then it became a crutch, then a requirement, then a fog that no amount of sunlight could quite dispel. Still, the routines of daily life carry on. There are calls to be paid, letters to answer, clothes to be mended, meals are served, rooms are aired, and the world, as always, demands composure. But behind every closed door, you know there is someone fighting a battle with a bottle and losing. The family's silence is a shield, but also a prison. You love them, but you cannot reach them. You mourn them, but cannot speak of your mourning. Victorian society, so proud of its manners and stoicism, has perfected the art of ignoring what it cannot fix. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, you hear her humming, a tune half remembered from happier days. You hope, for a moment, that she is finding her way back, but the next morning, the bottle is lighter and the shadows a little deeper. In another age, perhaps, there will be treatment, honesty, and hope. But here and now, all you have is the unspoken understanding that this, too, is part of family life. The addict you don't talk about. The secret you all keep. The love that endures. Even as memory and self drift quietly away. Coleridge, De Quincey, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, all creative geniuses and part-time hallucination enthusiasts. They turned their addiction into art, which Victorians called inspiration and we call a cry for help. It's the golden age of English letters, and every bookshop window boasts the latest volume of poetry, bound in blue cloth, stamped in gold, and, if you hold it to the light just right, you can almost see the fingerprints of laudanum on the spine. This is an era when literary genius and chemical experimentation go hand in hand, or at least hand in trembling hand. The salons and libraries of London are filled with the muffled rustle of turning pages, the soft clink of teacups, and the subtle clatter of bottles tucked discreetly under writing desks. Every writer has their favorite method. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, poet, philosopher, and champion napper, famously composed Kubla Khan after a particularly vivid laudanum dream. He claimed it was dictated to him by spirits, or possibly a very persistent headache. Thomas de Quincey, meanwhile, wrote an entire memoir titled Confessions of an English Opium Eater, transforming his nightly struggles into a masterpiece of introspective dread and rambling footnotes. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who turned her sickbed into a literary command center, produced some of the century's most tender poetry while dosing herself with opiates to keep the shadows at bay. It wasn't just the big names. A wave of sickly writers, invalid poets, and fainting essayists washed over the period, each one spinning laudanum-induced inspiration into tragic verse. If you didn't have a mysterious illness or a bottle of something strong under your pillow, were you even really trying? Letters and diaries from the era are filled with references to nerves, melancholia, and that unnamed ache behind the eyes that only a tincture, or a really strong metaphor, could soothe. The effects were everywhere. Poems sprawled with dreamlike imagery. Ice caves, sacred rivers, nightingales singing in the fog. Novels wandered through elaborate plots with heroines swooning in every other chapter. Critics, desperate to keep up, developed their own vocabulary for the phenomenon: opium visions, the fever of the mind, transcendent melancholy. If a poet submitted something incomprehensible, editors simply assumed genius was at work, or at least that a good dose of laudanum had been. Of course, inspiration had its price. Creative breakthroughs arrived at 2 a.m, accompanied by a side order of insomnia, paranoia, and the creeping suspicion that the wallpaper was plotting against you. Literary salons became a sort of group therapy, where famous writers compared headaches, shared apothecary recommendations, and recited lines that may or may not have made sense outside of a laudanum haze. Readers devoured it all, hungry for the next beautiful, tormented thing. Victorian publishers, sensing an opportunity, began to romanticize the connection between suffering and art. Was your favorite poet delicate or simply eccentric? Was the latest epic poem a triumph of imagination, or just the world's most eloquent symptom list? No one asked, and everyone bought the book anyway. In the end, the literary epidemic spread far beyond the page. A generation of readers learned to see beauty in agony and to treasure the sound of a poet's distant, opium-sweetened sighs. The world itself seemed tinged with dream logic. Nights longer, colors deeper, every emotion pushed to its Victorian limit. Looking back, you can't help but marvel at the strange mix of misery and genius. Some would call it tragedy, others call it greatness. But for a brief, foggy moment in history, England's brightest minds turned addiction into art, and their pain into poetry that would echo for centuries. The price? Just a little bit of lucidity and a whole lot of late-night writing. The bottle runs empty. You shake. You sweat. You promise to stop. Then the apothecary knocks on your door like the world's least helpful angel. Welcome to the least celebrated season of Victorian life. Withdrawal. It's not advertised in the tonic ads or whispered about over teacups, but it's as common as the morning fog. The first signs are subtle, a little more irritability, a touch of the vapors, a growing suspicion that the cat is judging you. You attribute your restlessness to the weather, your nerves to the neighbors, your sweating to the cut of your shirt. You're in denial, and in this era, denial is practically a household virtue. You tell yourself you don't need it. You're stronger than the bottle. After all, you survived family holidays, unventilated parlors, and 4 years of Latin at school. Surely you can go a day or two without a teaspoon of oblivion, but the world quickly proves otherwise. The headaches return with a vengeance, pounding behind your eyes like a determined tax collector. Your limbs ache. Every sound is too loud. Every shadow too long. You snap at your spouse for stirring tea too vigorously, then apologize with the fragile dignity of someone who knows they're losing a fight to a teaspoon. Sleep, once your refuge, now becomes a battlefield. You toss, turn, and negotiate with the ceiling plaster. Dreams arrive in fits and starts. Visions of rivers, flying teaspoons, and endless lines at the apothecary's counter. You sweat through your nightshirt, shiver under 3 blankets, and finally get up, padding around the house like a ghost with poor timing. The house is too quiet. The city is too loud. Even your own thoughts are getting on your nerves. In the midst of your struggle, the world carries on as usual. The mail arrives, bills to pay, neighbors to greet with forced smiles. You try to pass for normal, which is easier in Victorian England, where everyone expects you to look a little haunted. You assure your family that you're simply under the weather or recovering from nerves. Nobody asks too many questions. Everyone's too busy managing their own tiny crises to notice yours. But the days drag. Your resolve begins to crack. The mind plays tricks. You swear you see bottles in every corner, behind the candlesticks, in the pantry, tucked into the pages of your favorite book. You catch yourself searching old coat pockets, hoping for a forgotten vial. Each time the bell rings, your heart leaps. Perhaps someone is calling with news. Or, just maybe, a delivery. And then, just as you're ready to renounce civilization and move into the coal cellar, salvation arrives. The apothecary's boy appears at your door, cap askew, brown parcel in hand. He offers it up with all the ceremony of a priest delivering communion. You accept, hands trembling, promising yourself this is the last time, just enough to even things out, you mutter. Just enough to stop the shaking, calm the storm, and return you to the serene, if slightly detached, state that passes for contentment. You pour a measured dose, watching the golden liquid swirl. The first sip is both relief and defeat. You know, somewhere deep inside, that this cycle will continue. The bottle empties. The world darkens. The promises begin anew. The Victorians excelled at many things, denial chief among them. Entire industries thrive on your inability to quit. Doctors reassure, friends commiserate, and the apothecary always delivers. By evening, your symptoms have faded. You're calm, a little drowsy, and more than willing to forget the whole ordeal. Tomorrow, you'll try again. Or you'll decide it's better not to try at all. Either way, the household resumes its quiet, opium-scented routine. After all, in Victorian society, everyone has a vice. Yours just comes with a cork and a label that says, "For the nerves." And that, you tell yourself, is practically medicinal. Eventually, the newspapers catch on. Opium destroys lives. They scream, as if this is news to anyone who's been awake since 1830. But the public clutches its pearls anyway, while still sipping. One bright morning, as the fog lifts over London and the milkman makes his rounds, headlines appear in every respectable window. Scandal. Outrage. Society on the brink. If you listen closely, you can hear the collective gasp echoing up and down every cobbled street. Suddenly, everyone's favorite secret isn't so secret anymore. Laudanum, the gentle friend in the medicine cabinet, has been outed as a villain. The ink on the broadsheets is barely dry before neighbours are glancing at each other's teacups with suspicion. This is the Victorian version of going viral. Articles multiply, quoting doctors, politicians, and that one aunt who always claimed, "I never touched the stuff." Tales of tragedy spill into the parlour, often followed by wild speculation and the sudden realization that half the family is mentioned, albeit in code. Society matron's downfall, opium at the breakfast table, young poet's tragic end, too many tonics. There's a surge in letters to the editor, each more breathless than the last, blaming everything from moral decline to the mysterious increase in fainting spells at the opera. At tea, conversation takes a dramatic turn. Your cousin, who's always had a flair for the theatrical, reads aloud from the Times, gasping at the story of a vicar who drank laudanum by mistake and delivered his entire sermon in Latin. The congregation said it was his most moving performance. Grandmother shakes her head, claiming she always knew something was amiss, though her own special bottle is tucked behind the flour tin. Even the family dog seems on edge. The politicians weigh in, of course. Parliamentary debates fill with righteous indignation. Speeches are given, committees formed, and a new flurry of pamphlets appear at the post office, all warning of the dangers lurking in your own parlour. Save the children, ban the bottle, a spoonful of sin. There is talk of legislation, tighter controls, and a return to the golden days when people just ignored their problems the old-fashioned way. With repression and long walks in the rain, pharmacists and apothecaries suddenly find themselves in the spotlight. Customers arrive in disguise, peering over their shoulders before requesting the usual. The clever ones start relabeling their bottles herbal tonic, digestive cordial, or cough mixture, extra strong. The less clever simply sell out before noon. You begin to hear stories of underground suppliers, secret clubs, and coded knocks at the back door of the chemist's shop. The panic is both genuine and performative. Dinner parties are a study in doublethink. Half the guests loudly condemn the moral rot afflicting society, while the other half sip their tea with unusual caution, calculating exactly how long their personal stash will last. There are whispered confessions, sudden pledges to quit, and, inevitably, the old refrain, just one more drop, for the nerves. Meanwhile, the literary set is delighted. Nothing fuels art like crisis. And soon pamphlets and poems appear, satirizing the spectacle and quietly mocking the hypocrisy. Ode to the Opium Spoon, reads one, may you never be found in the cutlery drawer. The bohemians gather in smoke-filled rooms, raising their glasses to the noble art of forgetting. For a while, it seems the world is about to change. Laws are proposed, sermons are preached. A few brave souls pour their bottles down the drain, then immediately regret it. The newspapers thunder and wail, but the city marches on, a little more anxious, a little more watchful, but still unable to give up its favourite crutch. And in parlours across London, someone always manages to find a new excuse, a new label, a new way to keep the edge at bay. Moral panic, like everything else in Victorian England, is just another tradition, best enjoyed with a cup of tea and a healthy dose of denial. The temperance movement begins. Laudanum drinkers attend meetings about moderation while secretly dosing in the pews. Reform is slow when everyone's sedated. It's the latest fashionable cause, temperance. Posters plaster the streets, sermons thunder from pulpits, and earnest young ladies distribute pamphlets promising salvation from the perils of drink. The rallying cry is water, not wine. Self-control, not spirits. There's just one small problem. Nobody's mentioned the contents of those discreet little bottles rattling around in handbags and waistcoat pockets. You're invited to a temperance meeting at the local chapel. It's standing room only, but not for lack of seats. Most people just can't sit still for more than 5 minutes without getting the shakes. The room smells of musty hymnals and the faint, telltale whiff of something medicinal. You spot half the congregation glancing furtively at their laps, eyes darting to the exits. If anyone seems particularly serene, it's not because they're inspired by the guest speaker. It's because they're riding the gentle wave of a secret dose. The speeches are passionate. Mrs. Langley recounts her husband's battle with the bottle, omitting the fact that his recovery came about only after switching to laudanum and never looking back. The vicar reads aloud stirring passages about moral strength, his voice trembling ever so slightly, though whether from conviction or withdrawal is anyone's guess. The applause is polite, scattered, and a bit sluggish. Everyone is doing their best, but the average pulse in the room is slower than the pace of actual reform. After the meeting, refreshments are served. Tea, of course, and slices of heavy fruit cake. It's a social occasion, a chance to nod in agreement. make solemn vows, and quietly judge your neighbour's resolve. The bravest among you whisper confessions in corners. I've gone a whole week without port, though I do take a drop of cordial to sleep. My nerves simply won't tolerate cold turkey, but the pharmacist says his syrup is completely harmless. There is a sense of camaraderie, a fellowship of the mildly afflicted. Meanwhile, reformers patrol the aisles with suspicious zeal. They're always watching, always listening. Yet, somehow, the number of brown paper packages delivered to the back doors of respectable homes never decreases. Apothecaries expand their herbal selection. The truly creative offer tinctures, disguised as cologne, cough syrup, or even peppermint extract. The city's chemists become more skilled at discretion than ever before. In the drawing rooms and parlours of high society, the debate rages on. Some denounce spirits, but defend laudanum as a necessary remedy. Others pour their medicine into their tea with the same old flourish, confident that as long as nobody is actually slurring, there's nothing to worry about. Invitations to dry dinners are politely declined. Wet evenings, those lubricated by something stronger than conviction, are as popular as ever. There's a peculiar boredom at the heart of the movement. Without their nightly glass of sherry or that soothing bedtime drop, society's upper crust finds themselves with entirely too much time to contemplate their own ennui. A game of whist loses its sparkle. Afternoon walks seem twice as long. Poetry readings stretch on forever. A world without a crutch is, as it turns out, terribly tedious. Still, the reformers persist, their optimism undimmed. Posters multiply. Children are marched in parades carrying banners with slogans like "Choose water" and "Live pure." Behind closed doors, their parents quietly negotiate new recipes for tonic punch. A few souls do manage true sobriety, glowing with the self-satisfaction of the genuinely reformed, though often just as insufferable as the original zealots. Change does come, if at a glacial pace. Laws tighten, apothecaries hedge, and the social stigma grows. Yet for every bottle poured down the drain, another is hidden behind a stack of Bibles or under the floorboards. Victorians may crave virtue, but they also crave a good night's sleep. In the end, reform is a marathon, not a sprint, especially when everyone's moving in slow motion. Temperance is all well and good until the next bad day. Then it's back to tinctures, secrets, and the comfort of knowing that, in Victorian England, the greatest addiction of all might just be pretending you don't have one. By the end of the century, the haze begins to lift. Doctors start using words like dependency, toxicity, and please stop drinking that. Society looks around and realizes half of it has been asleep for 50 years. It happens gradually, like all uncomfortable realizations. There's no sudden awakening, just a slow dawning, as if someone has drawn back the heavy velvet curtains and let the first unwelcome rays of reality into the drawing room. The city that once thrummed with the quiet certainty of chemical contentment is now faced with a collective hangover. The doctors, once so generous with their prescriptions, have begun to mutter in medical journals and even, scandalously, in public. Laudanum is not a lifestyle, they declare, shaking their heads at the very culture they helped build. At first, no one wants to believe it. This is Victorian England, where tradition is sacred, and every problem has always had a liquid solution. But the evidence is hard to ignore. More and more, there are stories of friends who can't quite keep up at bridge club, of relatives who drift through life in a comfortable fog, and of neighbours who once hosted legendary dinner parties but now seem a bit lost, even when standing in their own kitchens. The social set, ever alert to scandal, starts whispering. Have you heard about Lady Darlington? She's sworn off the bottle. Any bottle. The vicar says his nerves are better since giving up his restorative. Some people, naturally, double down. swearing there's nothing wrong with a drop or two, so long as you never run out. Others begin to eye their medicine cabinets with a new suspicion, wondering if their sleep is quite as natural as they once thought. There's a shift in the air. Magazines publish cautionary tales. The dangers of tincture, how I survived my own medicine chest. Confessions of a former opium eater. Why I now prefer herbal tea. In the parlors, people discuss new fads, breathwork, exercise, drinking nothing stronger than lemon barley water, often while discreetly topping up their tea with the old familiar. Even the apothecaries feel the chill. Sales of laudanum dip. Bottles are moved to the back shelf. Pharmacists begin offering alternatives with names like Novena or Soothing Elixir, now with less opiate. Suddenly, there's a rash of health retreats, little spas in the countryside, where guests are promised rest and renewal and forbidden from bringing their favorite bottles. These retreats are full of people who claim to enjoy the fresh air while quietly suffering through their first sober afternoon in years. They take up hobbies. Some garden. Some write novels about their struggles. Most just nap a lot and try not to talk about it. At home, families notice changes. The dinner table is quieter. Conversation drifts into awkward silences that can't be dissolved with a spoonful of anything. The headaches return, sharper now that there's nothing to dull them. Tempers flare. Children seem louder. The fog in the streets thicker. The reality of life a bit more relentless. But gradually, as the weeks and months pass, something shifts. People start remembering what they did yesterday. The diary entries become less poetic, more factual. There's a sense of waking up, bleary but alive. Not everyone manages the transition, of course. Some hold fast to their old comforts. Others find new ones. But a strange thing happens. The world doesn't end. In fact, it keeps going, just as it always has. One cup of tea, one headache, one cautious conversation at a time. People rediscover laughter that isn't quite so soft around the edges, and grief that is, unexpectedly, survivable. The city, once lulled to sleep, stirs and stretches, and takes its first unmedicated breath in half a century. It's not glamorous, this great Victorian come-down, but it's honest, and, after all those years in a velvet haze, that honesty is a revelation. As the new century beckons, everyone looks around, wide-eyed and blinking, and wonders what, exactly, they've missed. The answer, quite a lot. But there's time to catch up. And for the first time in decades, the future feels, if not bright, at least a little less cloudy. When the empire sobers up, it's not pretty. The addiction, the artistry, the decay, it's all baked into the century's legacy. London's streets shine with progress. But under the gaslight, everyone's still chasing a dream in a bottle. The 20th century arrives with fanfare, electricity, and a growing suspicion that the Victorians may have overdone it on nearly every front. The world's largest empire, once running on industry and innovation, and an awful lot of laudanum, is now facing a reckoning. The proud marble facades and grand railway stations remain. But so do the old habits, woven into the fabric of daily life. The great projects, bridges, tunnels, the telegraph, stand as monuments to a fevered ambition, fueled as much by chemical courage as by genuine inspiration. By now, the authorities have tightened the rules. Laudanum, once the faithful companion of poets and parents alike, is reclassified, regulated, and removed from the shelves. Pharmacies lock it away, and newspapers urge the public to seek healthier solutions. But the habits linger. There are rumors of black market bottles, of well-to-do widows who still keep a little remedy tucked away for special occasions, of old writers clutching their battered flasks and reciting the best lines of the past. London has cleaned up its act, mostly. The lamps are brighter, the fog a little less deadly, but behind every window, there's someone remembering a sweeter haze. The hangover isn't just physical, it's cultural. Artists and thinkers look back at a century of achievements and scandals and realize just how many of their masterpieces were painted, written, or composed while drifting along the opium tide. Statues go up, commemorating visionaries whose greatest rival may have been their own chemist. The critics debate, did laudanum spark the Victorian imagination or merely blur its sense of proportion? It's hard to separate the genius from the fog. In households across Britain, the aftermath is quietly managed. Families adjust to sharper mornings and rougher nights. Where once a dose of laudanum smoothed the tempers and dulled the aches, now there's just tea, fresh air, and a kind of grim determination. Headaches are met with patience instead of potions. Grief lingers a little longer, but it is faced, not dissolved. Old bottles, drained and dusty, are tucked away in cupboards. A secret history, never quite forgotten. The empire itself is sobering up in other ways, too. The colonies demand their own voices. The old certainties begin to crumble, replaced by uneasy questions. What is progress, really? Can you build a society on borrowed time and borrowed comfort? The debates swirl in Parliament and the press, mixing nostalgia with a hint of regret. London's new century feels both exhilarating and unsteady, like waking up after a long sleep. Not quite sure who moved the furniture. There's a collective sense of vulnerability, as if everyone is walking out onto the street without their armor. The quick fixes are gone, and the real work of living, of loving, grieving, and enduring must be done unassisted. People rediscover the sharp edges of feeling. Some find it bracing, others unbearable. But there is a strange strength in the struggle. With the haze lifted, the city seems clearer, its beauty less dreamlike, its miseries less hidden. In the theatres and music halls, jokes about the good old days of soothing syrups become a staple. Playwrights lampoon the laudanum years, and audiences laugh, even as they wince. It's easier to joke about addiction when you're on the other side of it, at least most of the time. The real legacy of the laudanum era, though, is resilience. The Victorians survived not just the symptoms but the cure, staggering into the future with a battered optimism that refuses to fade. The century rolls forward, propelled now by coffee and the occasional aspirin. But under the glow of the city's new electric lights, the shadows of old dreams still flicker. The hangover of empire may never quite vanish. It lingers in the language, in the art, in the sighs of those who remember how easy it once was to chase hope at the bottom of a bottle. And yet, London keeps moving, buzzing, striving, blinking into the future, a little older, a little wiser, and maybe, just maybe, a little more awake. Victorian homes had a room just for fainting, which makes sense when you realize everyone was corseted, underfed, and quietly medicated. You learn to swoon with dignity. Practice makes perfect, especially when half your friends are unconscious by dessert. Let's begin with the architecture. No proper household is complete without a fainting room. It's usually off the main hall or discreetly tucked beside the drawing room, adorned with chaise longues, plush cushions, and, if you're especially affluent, a handy bell pull for summoning a glass of water or the family physician. The fainting room is a sanctuary for the overwhelmed, a retreat for those felled by bad news, strong opinions, or the simple act of standing up too quickly in a tightly laced bodice. You wake up and begin the daily ritual of dressing. Layer after layer, each tighter than the last, until your lungs are a distant memory. Breakfast is a delicate affair of weak tea and toast that may or may not have seen butter in the past week. Already you feel the world closing in, a combination of hunger, high society, and just the right dash of laudanum slipped discreetly into your morning tea. The stage is set for the mid-morning swoon. Perhaps it's a dramatic letter, a bit of neighbourhood scandal, or the revelation that Lady Foxworth wore last year's gloves to the garden party. Whatever the trigger, you clutch the nearest banister Raise a trembling hand to your brow and make a graceful retreat to the fainting room, floating just above consciousness in a haze of lace and floral upholstery. A gentle collapse, a sigh, and the reassuring coolness of silk cushions await. Of course, you're not alone. The fainting room is a social space, at least for those who can still stand long enough to walk there. Friends and relatives drop by with fans and smelling salts, prepared to offer support or simply collapse in sympathy. There's a quiet camaraderie among the fainting. You exchange tales of near misses and spectacular tumbles. The aunt who swooned through 3 seasons, the cousin who once fainted at the opera and awoke on stage, the neighbor who required a week of bed rest after a particularly spirited waltz. The men, of course, are baffled by all this fainting. They blame it on female constitution, nerves, or perhaps the wallpaper. The women know better. It's corsets, boredom, and the unspoken pressures of a life spent balancing etiquette, emotion, and the persistent risk of emotional combustion. Laudanum helps, but it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it soothes, sometimes it simply brings the swoon a little closer to the surface. If you're lucky, a faint is an escape. A moment of respite from a stifling dinner, a too serious conversation, or an unwelcome suitor. It's a reset button, a way to avoid explaining why you'd rather not listen to another discussion of railway timetables. If you're unlucky, you faint spectacularly and wake up with your aunt's perfume bottle pressed to your nose and your mother's voice hovering somewhere between concern and scolding. The truly experienced faint with style. A well-timed swoon can silence a room, shift the course of gossip, or even excuse you from an afternoon of forced needlework. Some ladies rehearse in private, perfecting the gentle fall, the flutter of lashes, the artful positioning of limbs, so that no ankle is ever exposed. By the time you're an adult, you can faint on command and recover with poise, ready for the next round. As evening falls and the rooms grow stuffy with gaslight and ambition, you find yourself grateful for the refuge. While the men argue about politics and the servants tidy away the remains of dessert, you rest in the quiet, catching your breath and perhaps sneaking a few drops more of your favorite tonic. Life will resume soon enough, with all its demands and indignities, but for now, you're draped elegantly across a velvet couch, queen of your own private intermission. In a world that refuses to make space for discomfort, the fainting room is both necessity and luxury, a soft landing for the overly civilized, and proof that sometimes the best way to survive is simply to take a break from consciousness. You're packing for a weekend in Bath. What do you bring? Clothes, a parasol, maybe a journal, plus 3 bottles of laudanum, camphorated spirits, smelling salts, and whatever else keeps your hypochondria entertained on the road. You're ready for anything, except sobriety. Packing in Victorian England is less about what you'll wear and more about how you'll survive. A short trip, just a few days really, is a logistical campaign against discomfort, unpredictability, and the twin specters of boredom and bodily malfunction. You gaze at your trunk, already half filled with petticoats and socks, and begin the real work, curating a personal pharmacy worthy of a minor nobleman or an overcautious sea captain. First, the laudanum. You pack it carefully, wrapped in linen, tucked between a hairbrush and last month's unopened letter. 3 bottles because you'd rather risk over-preparation than the horror of running out. 1 is for nerves, another for headaches, and the third is labeled emergencies, though you know every inconvenience could qualify with the right level of theatrical sighing. Next comes camphorated spirits, a pungent concoction used for fainting fits, the odd mosquito bite, and, if you believe the label, the restoration of general vigor. The scent alone could revive a small mammal, and it serves double duty as both a cure and a warning. Keep your distance unless you want to smell like the inside of a funeral bouquet. Smelling salts are essential. No respectable traveler would be caught without a crystal vial tucked discreetly into their reticule. You may never actually faint, but the possibility is half the fun. A delicate whiff ensures you're always within arm's reach of consciousness. Even if dinner conversation lulls you into a stupor, then there's the collection of lesser elixirs: peppermint water for the stomach, syrup of poppies for sleep, glycerin lozenges for a sore throat, and a mysterious blue powder the apothecary swears by. Though you remain unconvinced, it's not just chalk. A selection of herbal teas rounds out your kit, not because they work, but because it's comforting to pretend they might. You tuck all this into your trunk, alongside your travel-sized inkpot and a sturdy journal. After all, what is convalescence without the ability to record your symptoms in lurid detail? No Victorian trip is complete without a running tally of aches, shivers, and inconvenient dreams, all blamed on the unfamiliar climate or the suspicious look of the local fish. Travelling itself is a minor ordeal. The carriage jolts over every cobblestone. Your luggage threatens to topple from the roof, and you're forced to share space with distant cousins, their governess, and at least one screaming baby. The air inside is thick with camphor, eau de cologne, and the sort of tension that only arises when two people try to unfold a map at the same time. Halfway to Bath, someone inevitably asks for a restorative, and your trunk becomes the most popular seat in the carriage. The arrival is an event. Bath's crescent terraces gleam, the pump rooms bustle with the sickly and the fashionable, and your hotel room boasts not one but two chamber pots, a sign of real luxury. You unpack and line up your bottles on the dressing table, a comforting arsenal against the rigors of mineral water, new acquaintances, and the ever-present threat of gout. Other guests, of course, are similarly armed. An informal contest erupts, whose medicine chest is the most comprehensive, whose tonics are the most exotic. In the tea room, you overhear stories of rare French lozenges, imported digestive bitters, and a grandmother who survived 3 seasons on nothing but cough syrup and stubbornness. Each day is a round of sightseeing, hot baths, and medicinal sipping. The sun sets over Bath's golden stone, and you drift into sleep, lulled by the soft rattle of bottles and the reassuring weight of your personal apothecary nearby. You may not remember every detail of the weekend, but you can be certain of one thing. You faced every Victorian peril, aches, chills, gossip, and all, with a trunk full of courage, a splash of laudanum, and absolutely no risk of sobriety. While high society discreetly doses, the poor are crowded into dark, smoky opium dens. You look down your nose at their vice, ignoring the fact that your breakfast muffin is laced with something twice as strong. The hypocrisy is thick enough to spread on toast. Let's be clear, everyone in Victorian England is self-medicating, but not everyone has the luxury of calling it for the nerves. If you're wealthy, you can sit in your parlour, swirling laudanum into your tea with the same nonchalance you use to insult your cousin's hat. The ritual is discreet, wrapped in a veneer of medical respectability and embroidered handkerchiefs. Your medicine bottle bears a handwritten label, perhaps from a reputable London apothecary, and the dosage is as needed, which is code for all the time. But beyond the velvet curtains and the starched collars, London's underbelly pulses with a different rhythm. In narrow alleys behind unmarked doors, the city's working class gathers in dim, smoky rooms. These are the infamous opium dens, immortalized in penny dreadfuls and breathless parliamentary reports. Here you find dock workers, seamstresses, labourers, men and women whose days are spent wrestling with the unforgiving machinery of the empire, and whose nights promise little but sore muscles and fitful sleep. The dens are thick with incense and smoke, lit by sputtering lamps that give everything the yellow tinge of a fading bruise. Straw mats line the floor, battered pillows are the only comfort. The opium pipes are passed from hand to hand with the quiet efficiency of those who have little else to share. The atmosphere is less raucous than resigned. Escape, not celebration, is the order of the evening. It would be easy, from your position of comfort, to shake your head in judgment. The newspapers warn of moral collapse, painting lurid pictures of bodies sprawled in opium-induced stupor. Public figures make grand speeches about the moral rot creeping through the lower classes, conveniently forgetting the crystal decanters sitting on their own sideboards at home. Parliament debates closing the dens, while simultaneously increasing opium imports from the far reaches of the empire. The hypocrisy is almost poetic. Even the medical establishment draws a careful line. Laudanum is a tonic, opium smoking is a vice. You buy yours from a gentleman in a waistcoat. They get theirs from a woman with hands stained by ink and laudanum bottles. Social distinction is maintained right up to the moment both groups forget their troubles, one in silk pajamas, the other in patched trousers, but both somewhere else entirely. Children are not immune. In the East End, exhausted mothers bring infants to the dens, hoping a little smoke will soothe their cries and buy a night's sleep. It is a grim echo of the soothing syrups found in the nurseries of the rich. Suffering, it seems, is an equal opportunity employer. Only the packaging changes. You sometimes pass these places on your way to the theatre, catching a glimpse of hollow eyes and drawn faces through the murk. You think, what a tragedy. And then return home to your mahogany-panelled refuge, where tragedy is something you read about in a serialized novel, not something you inhale. The reformers eventually arrive, clutching pamphlets and good intentions. Committees are formed, investigations are launched. And yet, for all the public hand-wringing, the appetite for oblivion never quite goes away. The wealthy quietly reformulate their cures, relabel their bottles, and send their doctors new notes. The poor find new corners, new remedies, new ways to escape a city that never seems to love them back. As you butter your toast, you may glance at the latest editorial condemning the dens and think yourself immune. But deep down, you know that in Victorian London, there are only two kinds of people: those who escape with velvet and those who escape with smoke. Both seek the same forgetfulness, and both pay dearly for the privilege. In the end, the only real difference is which side of the city you wake up on, and whether your vice comes with a silver spoon or a battered pipe. So tonight, as you nestle into your perfectly ordinary, laudanum-free bed, heated, plumbed, and free of lurking Victorian doctors, take a long, quiet breath. The streets outside may hum with modern noise, but you're no longer in a world where every emotional hiccup could be solved with a bottle of opium and a side of existential confusion. You've survived a night among the silk cushions and swirling hallucinations of high society, where grief was bottled, anxiety was fashionable, and even the most respectable dinner party could dissolve into a scene from an amateur séance. You've seen breakfast dosed, poetry scribbled in a haze, and fainting couches crowded with the delicately distressed, all just to keep up with the impossible standards of an era both dazzling and quietly desperate. But if history teaches anything, it's that people will do almost anything to take the edge off, the edge of grief, the edge of boredom, the edge of a corset cinched 1 inch too far, even if it means seeing pink elephants over your morning tea or forgetting why you entered the room in the first place. You can't help but feel a kind of awe for the sheer persistence of the human spirit. Inventing, coping, enduring, and yes, sometimes overdosing. The Victorians may have been ridiculous, but they were also resilient in the most imaginative ways. So as you tuck yourself in tonight, be quietly grateful for what you have. For tap water that doesn't need boiling, for a pillow that isn't stuffed with horsehair, for the freedom to face life's miseries with something a bit safer than a teaspoon of liquid oblivion. Maybe send a gentle thank you to your ancestors, the poets, the parents, the party guests, who drifted through the fog because they stumbled so you could walk in a straight line. Because history may be a cautionary tale, but it's also proof that people are endlessly stubborn, occasionally hopeful, and always just a little absurd. Sleep well, and remember, your only job tonight is to dream, and maybe wake up tomorrow with all your silverware exactly where you left it. Good night.